My own theory, and the one I think that inspired the founders, like Madison, is a perfectionist theory that says that the reason we protect religion is that religion is a good thing. That, Madison says in the Memorial and Remonstrance that what is here a right before men is a duty before God. So the reason we protect religion is, or religious liberty, is that that our first duty is to know, love, and serve God, and that's why we protect it. That's what I like about Madison, that his view about religion stems from a belief that it's intrinsically worthwhile and more important than the laws of the state. I think at the time of the Revolution, there were maybe 30,000 Catholics in the United States. By the 1830s, there were maybe 600,000. By 1850, there were 1.5 million. By 1860, there were 3 million. So it was not like the Ukrainians flooding into Poland now, but it was pretty sudden and changed things the way immigration is being experienced as a change now. And you see a lot of resistance to immigration here. Now it comes from the South. In those days, it came from the East across the Atlantic. But it was a big change. We forget how homogeneous America was at the time all these Catholics started arriving. And their faith was important to them. That's one thing. The second thing is that those who were coming, the Irish in particular, were accustomed to being a religious minority in their own country. The English had controlled Ireland since the time of Elizabeth. There was considerable tension, a lot of it just about religious differences, but a lot of it was ethnic and then linguistic, and it took a lot of work to bring people to accept one another. The Common School project, which we identify Horace Mann with, had begun at just about this time. I think 1830s maybe. He was the head of the schools in Massachusetts, and he was himself a kind of Unitarian, I think, and was concerned about what role religion should play in the common schools, in the public schools where everybody was going. The thing about Protestants, unlike Catholic, is that there's a lot of divisions among them. They split up over organ playing or the Trinity or whatever. So there were many Protestant denominations, and Horace Mann and the Common School movement was looking for a way to get everybody onto the same page in school without eliminating religion altogether. So the proposal that he made, which was still in effect in Pennsylvania when I was a young man, was we'll just have reading from the Bible without commentary, because one of the important themes of the Protestant Reformation was the priesthood of all believers. People didn't need priests and bishops to interpret the scriptures for them. Each one could do it himself, just open it up and read it. The Bible was in the vernacular, and so they could do that. And this worked for all of the Protestant sects that there might be. There's a Protestant version of the Bible and a Catholic version of the Bible, and people actually came to differences over that. So it didn't work for the Catholic immigrants. And the solution that Bishop Hughes proposed, his preferred solution, was in the common schools we'll have no religion at all. This is the solution that we adopted in the 1960s in the Supreme Court. Failing that, he said, let the state support Catholic schools along with your Protestant schools, and that's the voucher solution that we're coming to now. It's interesting how little has changed in that debate in the space of going on almost 200 years. In the 19th century, when the federal government was the only government to which the free exercise clause applied, we persecuted the Mormons. And at that time, we justified our persecution by saying that there's a difference between belief and conduct, and the free exercise clause just protects belief. You can think privately whatever you want, but if it comes to how you're behaving, then the government can regulate that. And so they went after the Mormons for their practice of polygamy. In the 19th century, the free exercise clause just applied to the federal government, so the states could do what they want. My understanding of the First Amendment is it begins by saying Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The language, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is very artfully chosen. It actually appealed both to groups like those in Virginia who wanted no religious establishment at all, and those in Massachusetts who had a state establishment at the time the Constitution was adopted. So the language, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, meant in Massachusetts, Congress shouldn't interfere with the established church in Massachusetts or wherever. This was the law throughout the 19th century, and it wasn't until 1940, Cantwell against Connecticut was in the early 1940s, that the free exercise clause was applied to the states, so almost within our lifetime. It didn't matter so much because the government didn't do nearly as much in those days. You know, it would build roads and post offices and tax imports, but we wouldn't have a standing army. We didn't have a Department of Health and Human Services or a Department of Veterans Affairs or a Department of Energy and the government didn't regulate what the minimum wage was or who you could employ, or that all became a part of our life during the Depression in the Roosevelt administration and has grown ever since. But the government didn't regulate people's lives, and it didn't hand out a lot of money the way it does now. So collisions between what the government wanted to do and what people wanted to do in their faith just weren't so common. Free exercise became an issue in the 1940s. It started with the Jehovah's Witnesses cases. It was almost always about some religious minority who was at odds with what the government wanted to do and making exceptions for them, or not, as the case might be. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court reached a sort of maximalist view about religious liberty. It applied what the lawyers call strict scrutiny to laws that interfered with people's religious practice. The government, they said, has to have a really good reason for interfering, and it has to show that there isn't any other way of accomplishing what it wants without interfering with people's religious liberty. That was the law up until 1990, when the Supreme Court decided employment division against Smith. And the theory of Smith was that the democratically elected legislators are the ones who are going to give us the best protection. And at that point in our history, just 30 years ago, I think that was true. Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act unanimously in the House, 97-3 in the Senate. Essentially overturning by statute the rule that the Supreme Court had announced in Smith. Maybe the most important reason that free exercise is an issue today is that our own cultural beliefs about religion are changing. And religious liberty is only going to matter in a society where religion matters. If religion isn't all that important, then the freedom to practice religion isn't going to be all that important. So the strongest protection for religious liberty is people who worship God and go to church, and their views influence the views of the culture. That's completely outside the legal system, but it's going to inform the views of their elected officials, and it's going to inform the views of their neighbors about what they want to do. The Free Exercise Clause protects religious minorities more than people who are in the majority who could get their way with the legislature. I think the courts have an essential role to play, which is why we've put it in the Constitution and made it a right. It wasn't that religion itself had expanded, but rather that the government was now taking up so much room that if people were going to practice their faith, they were going to bump into the government at every turn. Who they were going to hire in their businesses, what they were going to teach in their schools, who they were going to marry and how, what their family relations would be like, who could adopt whom, and where you bury your dead, and so on. I had been thinking that was just because the government was omnipresent in contemporary society. I hadn't thought, but it's an interesting question whether the increasing pluralism of American society itself has forced us to enlarge our view about what religious liberty ought to respect. I think there's probably some truth in that. Religion has been very important to the smooth functioning of our democracy. Religious people are more than any others responsible for the civil rights movement. You know, we forget that Martin Luther King was the Reverend Martin Luther King, that he was motivated by his Christian principles to bring about a revolution in race relations in the United States, to accomplish what the Civil War did not for many Americans. It is really important to a very large number of people who think that their first duty in life is to know and love and serve God, and those who don't feel that way should nevertheless, in a democracy like ours, be called on to respect and protect that concern of people. It's a sine qua non of my being an American. I wouldn't live in a country that didn't let me practice my faith, because I'm one of those people who thinks, as James Madison did, that my first duty is to know, love, and serve God, and my second is to my country. So to me personally, it's an essential thing. It's really important to me personally, but I think it's also been important to America, and our success at it to date has, I think, made America an example to the rest of the world. One of the difficulties about religious liberty that will never solve to everybody's satisfaction is that it can't be carte blanche to do whatever you want. Religious actors are always going to encounter some kinds of government regulations that just won't give way. Even the strongest, the most protective formula that the Supreme Court came up with in Sherbert against Werner said that when there's a substantial interference with religious liberty, the Supreme Court or the courts will apply strict scrutiny, meaning they'll look at it very hard and they'll insist that the government have a really good reason. Well, think about really good reasons like fighting in wars. We've always been respectful of Quakers and other people who are conscientiously concerned about engaging in wars. But it's a good example of something that there are government reasons that are so important that religious practices are going to have to give way or move aside or find some other solution.